It's about constantly trying to rebuild relationship without being hypocritical, without lacking integrity ourselves. So we cannot in any way lie. We cannot in any way support falsehoods about marriage or the human person. But outside of that, there's a lot we can do to show our kindness and love. And it's much more work to do that than it is to just cut them off, right? The easy way out is just to be like, oh my gosh, like I'm just going to let them do what they want. Let's just live and let live. This is too complicated and there's going to be too many hurt feelings. So I'm just going to we're just going to drift apart. That is the easy way out, and it also lacks courage.
Welcome to the Ferris Love Podcast. Here we explore spiritual insights and practical strategies to help you cultivate a family life rooted in beautiful, self-giving love. Join us as we invite experts to share uplifting perspectives and actionable advice for navigating the joys and challenges of modern family dynamics.
Welcome back to the Ferris Love Podcast. Happy Tuesday, everyone. Today, I am joined by Ana Samuel, who works with CanaVox. I'm so excited for this conversation. Ana, how are you doing?
Super. Thank you very much for having me.
For our listeners who may not be familiar with you, could you share a little bit about your work, your background, what drew you to CanaVox, and a career of studying and defending marriage and family?
Sure. So my parents are Mexican immigrants. I was born and raised in Houston, Texas. And my parents' marriage was really my first school of understanding what marriage is, especially in hard times as well as in good. From Texas, I moved to Princeton to study, and I went to study politics under the great Professor Robert George, a natural law and constitutional scholar. And while I was at Princeton, I wrestled with the philosophical assumptions of my peers with regards to their relationships and their sexual behaviors very much. And that really set me on the path of asking myself, why do I see things so differently than my peers around me? So it was really born of this conflict between my values and the values of my surroundings. Then I went on to Notre Dame to start doctoral work in political philosophy. And I really dove into natural law theories there, because I was always interested in making the case for why I believed what I believed from a natural law point of view. And at Notre Dame, I studied with some great masters. There was John Finnis, Ralph McInerney, Alistair MacIntyre. But I really, really fell in love with the natural law theory of Montesquieu, a French Enlightenment thinker. Why? Because Montesquieu posed a very modern question. He wanted to know, how do you regulate something as private as sexual behavior in a pluralistic, liberal society? And that was really what I was most interested in. I love democracy and I love our pluralistic society, but I didn't like the sexual chaos that I saw. And how do you strike that balance in a pluralistic society? So that became the focus of my doctoral work. But at the same time, my life was unfolding. I met a wonderful man. We got married. We started having children. I helped launch the Witherspoon Institute, where I currently work. And it took me 10 years to do those things and finish my doctoral work. And at the same time, the cultural conversation around marriage started to really heat up during that time, particularly around same-sex marriage, the same-sex marriage. At that time, when I was newly married and having all my children, we were still debating same-sex marriage in the States. It hadn't yet gotten to the Supreme Court. And I followed that very closely. I was watching the scholarly conversation, the lack of scholarly conversation. And I decided, I felt very personally called to enter that line of work more publicly. And so that's really what led to the foundation of CanaVox. It's a project of the Witherspoon Institute. Witherspoon was kind enough to allow us funding to start. I started with a handful of other women. And that basically we've sought to create the space for civil conversations, intellectual and very personal conversations about marriage and sexual integrity in what continues to be a very divided nation, a very contentious time. But we really, it's always been an intellectual and a very personal journey at the same time. Started in my parents' marriage. It was sharpened in classrooms and lived out, in my public square and in my local communities.
Yeah, for sure. That's so interesting. You have a very academic background in this, and I think that's so neat and interesting too. I'm like, we can dive into so much right there. But okay, so you've studied the natural law foundations of marriage at a very high academic level, but you're also a mother of six. You're also just living in a marriage. What does the research say about what makes a marriage strong, and how has living it out differed in any way, if at all?
Mm-hmm. So I guess I'll focus on the natural law here. What does natural law say makes a marriage, and what makes it strong, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we could talk about social science on this. There are other disciplines shed light on this, and the social science on this is beautiful. And I really recommend Bradford Wilcox and Mark Rigneris' social science work. But I'm going to stick to what I know best, what I know best, which is natural law. And at the level of theory, the natural law is very clear. Marriage is a comprehensive union. Full stop. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Marriage is a comprehensive union. And what that means is that it's a union between a man and a woman of their whole selves, body and soul, mind, will, life plans, everything. That's open to children, faithful, and exclusive. All right. So no side partners allowed. Divorce is not on the table. You're going to be faithful. So that's what the theory says that marriage is. That's what the research on natural law says marriage is. But of course, living it is much harder because we don't live in a Platonic realm of ideas, right? We live in the messiness of ordinary life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, for that, you really have to work so hard because I think we tend towards drifting apart. We tend towards disunity, just left towards ourselves. So I like to think of marriage very much as a rope. You know, when you tie the knot in marriage, it's like two very strong ropes coming together. You can imagine sort of those big ropes on those old wooden pirate ships, two ropes together. And they're very strong and they have to learn to navigate and stay together during very difficult times, in bad weather, when the trials of life come, when the plague comes, when famine hits, all those stressors of daily life. And they will tend to pull the ropes apart. They will tend to fray, right? And so a good sailor has to constantly check on those ropes, tighten those ropes, clean the ropes, make sure they're still united, right? That's what a good sailor will do. And so as good sailors of our own marriages, we really have to constantly retie that knot. In more practical terms, if we want to get away from metaphor, I would say, at least in my marriage, and I think in many people's marriage too, it means, for example, checking in with your spouse every single day, making time every day, even if it's just 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the night, after all the kids are down, you put away your phones, just hold each other and talk to each other for 10 to 15 minutes about your day, about how things went, because sometimes that turns into 30 minutes or it turns to really important conversation, right? So that's one way to keep your rotes taut. And of course, prayer, maybe you can't pray with your spouse for whatever reason, but you can keep your prayer up, make sure your weekly services. There's a lot of social science data on how that practice helps keep our marriages intact.
Interesting.
So right. So basically practice, the theory is right. The theory is forever right, but the practice requires a great deal of effort to keep that comprehensive union strong.
Interesting. And then just to backtrack for a quick second, when you speak of natural law, what just for the listeners who may be like, okay, wait, what does she mean by natural law? Does she mean animals, like the animalistic instincts that we see in nature? So when you mention natural law, what are you necessarily referring to?
Great question. So natural law is basically natural law ethics. It's the idea that there is a natural morality, a natural universal morality accessible to all people and all places. It's based on human reason. It's based in humans thinking about how we thrive as human beings. So usually the first thing you have to do is ask, well, what is a human person, right? What is a person? And once we understand what makes humans, for example, different from mammals and what makes us different from all the other order of creation, we start to realize there are certain capacities that we have that if we want to flourish as an animal that reasons, that has free will, that has emotions, that has a body with body odors and a body anybody else. We need to do certain things so that that human animal flourishes. So natural law is that code of conduct that tells us, how does the human person flourish? Does the human person flourish by remaining in ignorance or by seeking knowledge? Does that human person flourish by deceiving others or by always telling the truth? Do we flourish by random casual sex, or do we flourish by committing to one person carefully? So natural law is a whole system of morality that doesn't depend on revelation, but just upon honest persons thinking about how we flourish as human beings.
Okay, that was beautifully put. I want to kind of go down a little school of thought just since we're on this topic. Obviously, we live in a society where natural law is kind of thrown out the window when it comes to marriage. And you have, obviously, you have gay unions that are happening, but then also we can dive into the whole world where there's like polyamory and then hookup culture where it's so opposite of natural law. And young people nowadays are having all of that thrown at them. And so for the parent who is, maybe they have children in middle school, how would you suggest they explain why those types of relationships do not fall under natural law? Because I think it's really easy for the world to say, well, it's natural for that individual person. Like they have this yearning. And so it's not necessarily the same as everybody else, but it's natural for them. And then I've heard the argument being made that, oh, well, we've seen this in nature before. So it's not completely out of the ordinary for people or for other animals to be doing this. And the point is, we're not animals, but you still hear that argument being made for it's natural for them. And just because they're an anomaly doesn't mean that they shouldn't be able to be quote unquote happy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, lots to unpack there. So, okay, I think the central question is, how do you talk to a young kid like around in middle school? All right.
Yeah.
So let me start with that, and then we'll get into disambiguating what the word natural means in the way you've sort of heard it said. All right.
Yeah.
So we have at CanaVox a new book. It's called Courageous Conversations, Tips for Talking to Your Kids About Sexual Identity and Attraction. In this book, it's about 150 pages. We really delve into how to talk to kids of different ages about all those difficult topics, LGBTQ issues, same-sex civil unions, etc. So, I can't possibly say it all in a few minutes.
Yeah.
But
they have to buy the book.
Yeah, or at least start, at least join a CanaVox group, or start following the webinars and stuff. But let's see if we can get a little bit practical nonetheless. So, okay, so first of all, as a parent, you need to be very well versed, okay? Because you're not just gonna, the key is, I think, leaning in, being very natural and leaning into ordinary moments in your child's life. Because you have to be ready. Things come up all the time in their lives when they will have questions, and you want to be the kind of parent who can answer those questions very naturally at their level, right? So that requires study on our part. It really does. And I don't want you to feel daunted. Like, it really doesn't require tons of study, but we really have broken it down as simple as possible in this book. And it has gotten a lot of great reviews. So I do encourage you to just flip through it, or just try to read a few minutes here and there. So with a young middle school, middle school is actually a really important time. We distinguish between 3 different stages. And this isn't just CanaVox. Good developmental psychology, Erik Erikson, Jean Piaget, other great psychologists have looked at childhood and said, okay, more or less, this is hazy, right? We humans are not robots, but more or less, there are 3 stages that are relevant here. From 2 to 8. From 2 to 8, we call that the sheltering stage. So when they're very young, you want to shelter them from the lies and really talk to them about the beauty of marriage and the truth of sexuality by reading great stories to them, fairy tales, movies. You really want to protect them from confusion before the age of 8. After 8, between 9 and 14, which is, I think, the time you're asking about, middle school more or less, this is when you need to help them build a filter. Okay, build a filter. Now, what is a filter? When we talk about building a filter, I mean, usually a filter selects what passes through it, right? And blocks out the bad. So you want your middle schoolers to be exposed now to all sorts of error You're watching them get exposed because you're helping them distinguish right from wrong. You're helping them understand, well, what that kid said is not quite right. We believe this for this reason, right? Because during this stage, 9 to 14, kids are still very, very open to their parents' direction. They will listen to you, and they will actually really appreciate it when you talk to them like emerging adults. You're giving them insider information on how adults think about this.
Yeah.
They feel empowered, and they're usually very receptive. That window starts to close around 14 or 15. 15 years old and beyond is really age of guiding them through more independence. You're giving them more independence. And at that age, they actually stop wanting to listen to you. Like a lot of kids are like, okay, I can form my own opinions now. I'm smart. You don't need to,
Yeah.
you don't need to say that anymore. So this is why 9 to 14, that stage 2, we think of it as like the strike zone for the most important time to talk about the most issues with our kids. A lot of parents will scoff at that and say that's too young, but we have demonstrated so many times that it is not too young. It's actually a great age. So let me just give you an example of one way in which an ordinary parent can just lean into a natural opportunity. And this is an example that comes right out of our book. It's the real story of one of our CanaVox leaders. She told us about this day when her 10-year-old daughter came home from school. And she talked about how a friend of hers had been really sad because her dad hadn't come to see her, hadn't come to visit her that weekend. And so the girl said, yeah, Ava was really sad today. She didn't want to play at recess because her dad didn't visit her. So mom put down what she was doing, okay, because the daughter's telling her, like, her little CanaVox radar came up, and she put down whatever she was doing in the kitchen, and she went to sit with her daughter. She was like, oh, tell me how that made you feel. She was like, well, I was sad for Ava, but I just wanted to play, I didn't know what to do. So I went to play for somebody else. And so then her daughter asked, like, why isn't her dad with her? And so her mom explained, well, her parents were never married. Eva doesn't have like a married mother and father, and her father has moved out of the house now. So she sometimes sees him. And the little girl was like, you can do that? And her mom was like, well, a lot of adults do that, but it's not necessarily the right thing to do. Right?
Yeah.
And so they talked about why their family believed adults need to get married first before children. Because when you get married first, before you have a sexual union and make a baby, you get married first, you're saying, we're going to stay together and we're going to take care of any children that come our way. And so that structure, that promise protects children from what Ava is feeling. She just wrapped it up. She kept it really short and sweet. So she took an ordinary moment from everyday school life and turned it into an opportunity to explain why marriage, as opposed to cohabitation or as opposed to a hookup with a random person, is so important for a child, because children long to be with their mother and father. Okay.
Yeah.
That's just one example of the way in which we encourage parents to be ready to lean into conversations. And it was a lot of a compassion, right? Tomorrow, can you think of something you can do with Ava so that you can help her feel better? She's really sad. And so they came up with ideas. So it's not about like, I don't want you to play with Ava. No, on the contrary, now that you understand what Ava's going through, how can we make her day better? Okay. So it's truth and compassion.
Yeah, that's really important. And I love how neatly she explained that, and it wasn't over the top. It simply kind of stated as things were, but then also she explained it in a very digestible way, and I think that's so important for anyone, honestly, just nowadays too. Even the adults, sometimes they need something just so digestible, because I think we can tend to overcomplicate things. I want to touch on, so in this example, you talk about the importance of a good family structure and what that offers to children, and, the importance not only to uphold the importance of this structure, but why is this structure so important for parents who are like, okay, like I understand it is a good structure, but why? Like, what is the research behind why a man and a woman, besides the obvious committing to each other, is so vital for a child's happiness and success? And why is the natural structure of a man and a woman in marriage better than two men or two women?
So basically, there are two rival definitions of marriage in our culture today. And those two different structures, structure is a great word. Okay.
Mhm.
So the natural law definition of marriage is basically there are four pillars to this structure. Okay. It's a union between a man and a woman.
Mhm.
It's open to children. Okay. The natural law definition is at its core open to procreation.
Yeah.
Third, it's permanent. Okay. Divorce is not a backup option in this. It is a commitment to a lifelong marriage.
Mhm.
Finally, it's exclusive. There are no side partners or little flings allowed in this version. The progressive definition of marriage basically eliminates all four of those pillars. Okay.
Yeah.
For the progressives, basically the definition of marriage they advance says it doesn't have to be a man and a woman. Any gender is okay. They don't have to be open to children. I mean, if they just want to get together and not have kids, that's fine because it's more about the adult's desires and the adult's happiness.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be permanent. I mean, hey, for now it's good, but in 10 years, we might fall in love with somebody else. So it's divorce or separation is always sort of an option.
Yeah.
And fourth, it doesn't have to be faithful, especially in the cases of men. So there's a lot of evidence, social science evidence, that same-sex partnerships among men are very well known to be non-monogamous.
Interesting.
Women, same-sex women are very faithful, tend to be very faithful, but men are not. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of common sense reasons for that, but we don't have to get into that now. So if you look at the structure of natural law marriage and those four pillars, and then the
Mhm.
lack of structure of the progressive version, it's pretty easy to see why one of these options is so great for kids. Okay. So first of all, the first pillar of marriage, when there's a mother and father in the home, okay, it provides a gender balanced home for the kid. Okay. The
Yeah.
mother and the father are each offering their unique biologically based advantages. Okay. The mother providing all the secure attachment that child needs. The father pushing the child to get ready for the world and like out of their comfort zone and gaining in confidence as they enter the real world. There's also something called the Cinderella effect.
Mm.
This is a term from social science studies. Basically, it's been very well documented that children are way more likely to be abused, neglected, or have just worse outcomes when they are being raised by a non-biological parent. So the Cinderella effect,
Interesting.
it refers to the stepmother in Cinderella,
Yeah.
the Cinderella effect, that when you're being raised by somebody who's not biologically related to you, there is just nature is not as easily on your side, right? When you can
Mhm.
see that your child looks like you, has some of your own quirks, et cetera, biology is helping you to bond and care for that child. And
Yeah.
when you are unrelated to the child, I mean, I think every babysitter knows this, right? Like,
Yeah.
when you're not related to the child, you just don't bond with that child in the same way. Now,
Mhm.
there are, of course, all sorts of qualifications to this because there are always exceptions to the rule. Okay.
Yeah.
Even those who study the Cinderella effect will note that there are fantastic step parents out there and fantastic adoptive parents out there who do defy the odds and who do bond and who are these great parents.
Mhm.
But when you look at large scale,
Yeah.
like random samples, and you study and control for all the variables, it is true that that first pillar, the biological connection, meets a need for the child and it encourages the parents to take better care of that child.
Mhm.
Secondly, when they're not open to children necessarily, it completely changes the outlook. So children are not just something to be engineered or acquired to satisfy adult desires, right?
Yeah.
That's a very different outlook than the natural law outlook, which sees children as a great gift that the adults are meant to serve and care for, right?
Mhm.
So you either have an adult-centric home or you have a child-centric home, a child and marriage-centric home, right? So the
Yeah.
natural law definition is creating this matrix of care for others, whereas the progressive definition is putting the desires of the adults on the pedestal. Okay. So you can
Mm.
imagine why that's not great for kids. Okay.
Yeah.
Thirdly, the permanence. I mean, I think that's really obvious when a home is not full throttle committed to permanence, the children are much more likely to suffer separation and all the instability that entails, as well as infidelity, right? If you have other romantic partners entering the house or flings, that
Yeah.
adds a level of complexity for a child. So I could go on and on about why the structure of marriage seems to be perfectly designed to meet the needs of children and the mother and the father, whereas these progressive definitions that have cropped up are turning their backs on the most essential needs of children.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even just touching on the point of that first pillar of biology with an adoptive situation or even step parents, I feel as though those are different than when you have a progressive view of marriage, and it's just almost like a swinging door, like it's just coming through. Of course, they're not going to care for the children as much as like an adoptive family who's like they're in their marriage and they choose to adopt a child. Like I think that plays a huge role in the structures of the well-being of the child.
Right. So let me just stress this. Let me put it this way. I agree with you, but I would put it a little differently.
Yeah.
A lot of this depends on the mindset, because you can have a man and a woman who marry, but who have a progressive view of marriage. Okay.
Yeah.
And you can have a blended family, right? Second marriage, that have a very natural law mindset. They understand that that's the ideal, and they're for that ideal. They're striving, even though it's the second marriage or even though one got divorced, they understand out of humility that the ideal was the natural law ideal. And so what they're doing is they're doing hard things for their kids. They're doing everything possible to sacrifice for those kids so they can have the closest they can to the natural law marriage. And I think that's what we applaud. We applaud the single parents who also see the natural law ideal as the ideal, and they're doing everything they can in their power to get as close as they can, even though they're a single parent.
Yeah.
So I just want to stress that just because you have a man and a woman married doesn't mean that they have this natural law, selfless, child-centric, permanent, exclusive outlook.
Yeah.
You know? And it's really a call to all of us to be consistent, right? Because you will also find a same-sex couple of women who, golly, I've met some and they are remarkable, even though they are not satisfying one of the most fundamental points, right? I have definitely seen in my life some heroic cases of same-sex couples that, I'm going to be very careful to be judgmental because I've seen some very beautiful cases. So I guess what I want to say, we live in a broken world, okay?
Yeah.
And it's very hard to live up to the ideal of natural law marriage, okay? So the important thing is that all of us do our very best to live up to that ideal. And then we cannot, for whatever reasons, only God can judge, we continue to strive, right? That's very different from saying that's not the ideal. Like, I don't all that. Like, you don't need a man and a woman. That's the progressive mindset, which I want to caution us about.
Yeah, for sure. And there's, like you said, always exceptions to a case, but then also like it comes down to the mindset and how they approach their marriage. And even for a man and a woman in marriage, like it comes down to whether or not they're fighting for it, and they have the goal of making sure that they are creating an environment where all people involved can thrive.
Yes. And let me just clarify, because I don't want to cause scandal. When I talk about these same-sex couples of women that I've met, I've seen some cases of women who they did not intentionally create a child with third-party reproduction. They didn't intentionally alienate anybody. They're caring for their nieces and nephews. They're living together quietly. Hopefully they're living chastity. I've seen some cases where you see people honestly trying, that's very different from the same-sex couple who is going to create a child using IVF, buying sperm off of the internet, using a surrogate from Guatemala to have their child, completely doesn't care about whether a mother is there in the home, So I just want to stress that we have to be very careful to think about what we're seeing around us, and so that we can be compassionate while also having a very clear-eyed about the truth of things.
Yeah. This actually leads perfectly into my next question, because I think I like that you stressed the point of it's really easy to just take in the world as it's handed to us on the internet, and you see sometimes the worst of people. We often see the same-sex couple who is using IVF, who is picking and choosing just the child that they want, who's going to be biologically the most supreme, and disregarding all the other IVF children that they've created. And so it's important to look with compassion at, every person's situation and how they got there, and look through it through a lens that is first and foremost trying to give benefit of the doubt and trying to be understanding. I think we've reached a point in society where people cut off family members really quickly the minute there's any bit of disagreement. How would you say, or how would you suggest a family stay genuinely unified when there are real differences in values?
This is really tough. And the first thing that comes to my mind is this beautiful story we have on our website. It's called Leah's Story. So for those of you who want to go check it out, it's under the session called Loving Those with Same-Sex Attraction. Leah tells a story of her sister so she grew up in a very traditional Christian home, and her younger sister was maybe a little bit neurodivergent growing up. They didn't really notice it until later. And very traditional kind of like mother, father, 2 kids family, normal American family. And when the younger sister grew up, she came out as gay, and she decided to enter into a same-sex relationship. Leah explains her struggle with this, that she just didn't believe this was coherent with what she believed about marriage. And she did not support this in her sister. And she talks about how soul-crushing it was to talk to her sister about this, and then the subsequent rejection by her parents, because her parents sided with the younger sister. And even though they had been Christian all their life and professed other beliefs, when the younger sister came out, the whole extended family sided with her sister. And so she was left alone defending the natural law view of marriage. And you see in this story basically decades of her experience, and how she's constantly trying to rebuild her relationship with these people around other shared loves. So maybe somebody out there listening, has a family member and you wildly disagree about the definition of marriage. But maybe you root for the same baseball team, and maybe you can get tickets to see the Red Sox together. Or maybe you can't go to your transgender nephew's coming out party that your brother is throwing. But when it's his birthday, you can message him or send him a gift. It's this constant effort to build and rebuild our relationships. It's kind of like the rope again, we tend towards disunity with our family. And so it's about constantly trying to rebuild relationship without being hypocritical, without lacking integrity ourselves. So we cannot in any way lie. We cannot in any way support falsehoods about marriage or the human person. But outside of that, there's a lot we can do to show our kindness and love. And it's much more work to do that than it is to just cut them off, right? The easy way out is just to be like, oh my gosh, I'm just going to let them do what they want. Just live and let live. This is too complicated and there's going to be too many hurt feelings. So I'm just going to we're just going to drift apart. That is the easy way out. And it also lacks courage. We're all about courageous conversations at CanaVox. About courage. It takes far more courage and work to get in there. And even though everyone's hating on you, to try to be the better person and keep seeking unity, And it's messy. We're usually the first ones that grow out of these experiences. We grow in compassion and we grow in backbone because it forces us to be more coherent. So if even only for your own sake, for your own moral development, keep working at it and leaning into those experiences.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think that sometimes families who deal with, a difference in value and suddenly a difference in action on that value, whether it be, a gay relationship or transgenderism or even maybe just like hookup culture, I think that they can, especially if they have kids, they suddenly struggle with this. How do I, by my example of loving this individual in my life, also show an example to my children that we don't want this. And just because I'm being friendly with them doesn't mean that I think that you should do this. How would you suggest, is there a quick and easy way to encourage parents to navigate that?
So I don't know if it's quick and easy, but we like to think, CanaVox, one of our tools is we like to think about the different hats we wear. Okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes this helps us as we navigate our relationships with our responsibility to our children. So many of you out there probably wear the brother or sister hat.
Mm-hmm.
Many of you probably are also mothers and fathers. That's a different hat you wear. Then you wear the professional person hat, And in each of these different sets of situations or relationships, you have different roles and responsibilities. And sometimes it's about learning how to live unity of life, or learning how to be one person, one coherent person, but who's in different contexts and in different situations require different things. So for example, let's say your brother comes into town. It's Christmas time and your brother's in town. He wants to introduce you to his same-sex partner. He wants to come over.
Yeah.
You have very young children. So what's happening here? Your hat as a sister is in conflict with your hat as a mom, because
Mm-hmm.
when the kids are very young, you want to shelter them from all deceit. You want to shelter them, protect them from misinformation, because you don't know if they're going to be very affectionate and touching each other. I mean, you have no idea how
Yeah.
they're going to behave. So what you do is you put on your sister hat and you say, okay, I can meet you guys at the bar for a few drinks on Friday night. Happy to do that. But we've got a lot going on this weekend at home, so it's not the best time to come over. And
Mm-hmm.
that way you have fulfilled your obligation to your brother, but you're also fulfilling your obligation to your children and your husband, who might be very uncomfortable as well.
Yeah.
So this is one of the things we tackle at CanaVox in the book and in other areas of our website, how we execute this commitment to the truth in different ways, depending upon our office, depending upon the role and responsibility we have in different environments. And
Mm-hmm.
if you are, for example, the president or the principal of a school, you
Yeah.
have a different obligation there too. And if there's a parent who comes in and he has his same-sex partner, of course you need to come and welcome them and talk to them in your professional capacity, right? So a lot of this depends upon these prudential decisions that come from thinking very carefully about our roles in our
Yeah.
relationships.
Amazing answer. We are running out of time, but thank you so much for just taking the time to chat with us and share all of your knowledge. For a family that's just starting out and is listening, and they're maybe like, this is so amazing, but we feel really overwhelmed with the amount of information that we've just received, what are 2 or 3 non-negotiable anchors you would tell them to protect above everything else as they take their step into, protecting their marriage, but then also protecting their children and upholding the values that they believe, while also looking at the world with a compassionate viewpoint?
I mean, the unity of the marriage really is central. That dynamic unity, sometimes it's like a tug of war with our
Yeah.
husbands. The rope analogy stretches in many ways,
Yeah.
but you're still unified. Even if you're in that tug of war, you're still together,
Mm-hmm.
So the unity in your marriage, from the earliest months of your marriage to the oldest months of your marriage, it's about those 10 to 15 minutes a day of talking about these issues together, because there's something else too. Not only are 2 heads better than one, but 1 male and 1 female head are better than 2 male or 2 female heads. And
Mm-hmm.
the dynamic between a man and a woman's perspective and how we check and balance each other out, round each other out, it really, we benefit so much from that dialogue in marriage, because my husband helps me moderate some of my excessive feminine tendencies, and I help him moderate some of his excessive masculine tendencies. And
Mm-hmm.
together, that creates the teamwork you need to guide your children in a well-balanced way. So it's
Yeah.
really about having those dialogues. I do, of course, encourage you to pick up our book. I cannot stress how easy it is to read. We have cartoons in here for busy parents, and it really will give you a really solid formation all the way across on all these issues. And if you can form a reading group on it with your friends, I don't say this just because I want to promote the book. I say it because
Yeah.
I've heard from so many young couples who have truly thanked us for this work. And it's not something I authored alone. I authored it with all the CanaVox state leaders. It's not just me saying these things. It's 50
Mm-hmm.
people with lots of different expertise, levels of different religions, different backgrounds, who have all come together to agree on every word in this book. So it
Yeah.
represents a broad coalition of thought, okay?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of expertise from psychiatrists, psychologists,
Yeah.
economists, lots of philosophers. So I would recommend that. And of course, prayer, so study, unity, prayer. Just pray your guts out, You will be
Yeah.
praying a lot during this process. And of course, all the graces that come from prayer will be with you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Where can people buy the book? Where can people find you? How
Yes.
can they get involved?
So it's on Amazon. So it's called Courageous Conversations. tips for talking to just type in CanaVox Courageous Conversations and you'll get it. If you want to buy it in bulk, we have a great reduced rate. If you go to canavox.com and go to our shop, we also sell it in bulk. And you can reach us at info@canavox.com, CANAVOX.com. Thank you so much, Amy.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for being here. And to our listeners, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. We will see you next Tuesday.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fairest Love podcast. In 2026, we continue to share the devotion to Mary, Mother of Fairest Love. If you like what you heard on today's show, please visit our website at fairestlovefamilyproject.org, where you can find additional podcasts and other resources for families. Be sure to also check us out on social media at Fairest Love Project. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you on an episode soon.